Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ilkka Lappalainen. I work at the CSC. I'm the deputy head of ELIXIR here and ELIXIR Finland, and I manage a group specializes on data management and interoperability. And today we're talking about sensitive data and how one should manage sensitive data. So to go, these are the things that I thought we should go through today. So the first one is how do we define sensitive data, and what kind of things are within that domain that we should know about. Then what about my own data? Is it sensitive or not? And what should I do about that? Who's helping me? And the last thing we come to is the data management cycle. So those that are CSC services that we provide for that, and what kind of other international initiatives there are that could help you to go a bit further on your research field. But let's go first and think about the sensitive data. It is actually defined in the Personal Data Act, and some of the text that I prepared for there is not showing from the slides now. The comments are not showing. But you can imagine what the Personal Act will define, that the personal data is the names, the identifiable information, the sex, the race, the religion. These are all information that one should never expose to others without and manage under the Personal Data Act. What then comes to more to the common things about the research is that it's coming from, the data is collected from human samples, and those humans whose samples we are managing have consented the data for research, but not necessarily for fully public dissemination or use. And that's called the consenting. And the consent, if it's an old one, it may define a very clear plan what the data can be used for, and in a more normal way it's much more broader, allowing different types of research use of that data. But nevertheless, it's all defined in that consent, and that's part of the Biobank Act. There are other things that are also important, which may not always come to our mind when we're doing research on human data. So some of the statistical information that is provided by Statistics of Finland is classified as sensitive data as such. And there are also IPR issues that are defined in contracts that are, for example, made between a small or private sector enterprise and another private sector enterprise, or the service provider that provides the data platform for analyzing the data. But so these two last points are something that do exist. Please keep them in mind. But most of the time during this talk, we concentrate on the first 3 points. Now, a way to look at this is to anonymize the data, which means that it is impossible to relate that data back to the subject. And it's safe. It can be disseminated and used as any other fully open data. But it is also true that in this field, when you collect a rich data set from humans, for example, genomic data, it is not possible to anonymize that data. So then we have to look at something called pseudonymization, which means that the data does not carry anymore any of the personal information. It does not carry the name, the address, the phone number, healthcare or social security numbers. Those are replaced with an abstract identifier in many cases, and the link between that data set and those who still can link these data back to the persons are separated. So if the data is consented for secondary use, it doesn't come with the mapping. In the case of a biobank, the biobank might hold the mapping between the pseudonymized data and the personal data, but the researcher would get access to the pseudonymized data. The consequence of this is that the pseudonymized data must be processed as it would be personal data, though. And this comes more clear if you think about the GDPR. So a few years back, the European Commission thought about this for many reasons. And the idea was to transfer Europe into something which is fit for digital age. And one of the most important components of that is the General Data Protection Regulation, or GDPR for friends. And it applies to every single member state as such. And it also applies to data that is collected from the European Union members, citizens, but potentially used outside of the EU. And this is something that one of the most important things to understand about the GDPR is that it's not to prevent research. It's rather to support it and make it change our environment in a way that we will do it in a responsible way. One of those is to simplify the regulatory environment that supports us within the European Union. So the data would be more easier to share. The citizens whose data we collect and use for research, in this case, also trust that the data is managed in a way that this can be done in a modern way, where we are collecting data about hundreds of thousands of individuals and using that for research. Now, GDPR defines two important roles. The organizations that collect the data and control it are called the registry owners, and they define how this data can be used, and then there can be an instance that provides the data platform that is called the processor. There will always going to be a legal agreement between the processor and the controller. Something that you might not have understood yet is that if you have an authority to use the data, for instance, from a biobank, that would be a controller, you will become a controller yourself, and you have to define how that data can be then processed on the platform that the processor provides for you. So these two roles, controller and processor, are important. And then specifically about the processing of personal data, there are some main things that are always true. The processing must be lawful, it must be transparent, it must be used in a legitimate purpose and limited to what the consent originally stated. So if the consent, for instance, states that it can be used for neurological diseases, then it cannot be used for anything else but that. The controller is responsible for demonstrating the compliance with the regulation. But just to remind you that under the GDPR, the controller and the processor work together always, and they share the responsibility. Now, what do I then need to know about my data? So when you start think about your own research project, it's good practice to start thinking about whether you're actually collecting something that is defined as sensitive data. And the best way of trying to understand the nature of your data is to use a data management plan, or DMP. And that's a living document. So that means that you create that at the start of your research project, and then it's been reviewed regularly throughout the research project. And it's shared with your funder, with the guidelines of your own organization that you work for, And it also defines how you're going to collect the data, how you document different aspects of the data, the metadata, for example, what kind of metadata standards do you need to use for those data, how you use that data and where you store it, how many backups do you need, and most importantly, are you going to share that data, and what are the long-term preservation needs for that data? So typically this starts in the very beginning of the project by defining that I will, for example, collect data from and use from a biobank. These are human data. I will collect the genomes of each of those samples. The genomes are encrypted when the data comes to my storage area that has been dedicated for me by my own university. The university has a way to provide me the backup strategy. I will comply to the international genomic metadata standards. I will share the data only within those people who are authorized in my research project, or those that may be your collaborators in that project from other institutes. And eventually, once my project is finished, I will submit all these data to the de facto standard long-term archive, and the data ownership is defined in a way that the data belongs to the biobank in this case, and the biobank will authorize the secondary use of that data. This would be an example of a simple data management plan. And once your project gets more complicated and up and running, and you know more about the data, you will keep updating the DMP. Now, where do I get some support for writing the DMPs? So the first thing is always to check your own organization and whether you have a support office that would tell you something about the policies, the data policy, and the data management plan, the resources that they will provide for you. There are tools available. So one of the national tools is called DMP Toolie. But there are others as well that you can have a look at. They have templates already available that help you along the way. And in case of DMP Toolie, it includes guidance already for sensitive personal data. And so if we look at the DMP Toolie, here's a plan that is a cut from the current guidance, which gives you access to all types of sensitive data definitions under the different universities. So depending where you're coming from, you will be able to read your own guidelines that are specific for your own organizations. Now, there are also help from other sites. So universities and higher education and the research sector institutes in Finland are all eligible to use the CSC services for sensitive data, part which we are still building and some which we already have in operation. One of the most commonly used service is a cloud-based service where you can bring your data to CSC, or you can integrate the data into our virtualized cloud service directly from your own research institute. It's something called infrastructure as a service. This means that your own organizational admin people can configure all these necessary networks and virtualized resources and the storage space for you. They will allow you to access those resources as well. Our role is basically just to provide the service for your organizations. You will be able to define your own operating systems and what kind of applications you want to run there. And the firewall is of course your own organizational firewall. You will also follow the security that is defined in your own organization, although your organization has a contract with us on providing this service for you. The service is a typical open source OpenStack, and there's more information about the service in that link behind underneath. And here's a bit more just for those of you who are interested in from the IT point of view. So a typical researcher in the organization, you don't have to know all the details, but you would be able to either log in directly into the CSC virtual machine, which is on the right-hand side on the picture, but you would do it by providing your own username and a password that your own IT manager gave to you in your own organization. Another way would be that you would submit your jobs into a queue that behind the scenes uses the virtual resources from the CSC. And the IT admin person would log in through the internet to our OpenStack, the cloud operating system, and provide you the virtual resources that you need. So they are defined per contract, and we give them all the access that they need for providing the service for you. You can always contact our service help desk if you have something specific that you want to know about the service. But by far the best proxy is your own local IT person. Now, something then about the initiatives abroad, where many of us who are working in the sensitive data and the human data specifically are already involved. And so this picture here is quite simple, but hides all the complexity of the sensitive data and the development, the standardization, and the international collaboration. So let me walk you through it. So the ELIXIR is an organization that is meant to standardize and long-term fund the life science in Europe. And the main point for ELIXIR is to understand the communities and their needs, and what kind of metadata standards they, for instance, need, what kind of analysis environment they do need for their research, and then drive those requirements through the Global Alliance for Genomics and Health so that we can standardize them and then become part of the global toolkit that we as the Europeans also benefit. So whatever is true for the Asians and the North Americans should be true here in Europe. And so if you look at the ELIXIR then specifically, so ELIXIR consists of 22 member states. Finland is one of them, and CSC is the ELIXIR node that you can see as a white circle in the Finnish map. We coordinate the life scientist requirements for the ELIXIR community as a whole from the CSC. So we try to talk to every one of you and understand what you would need. And then so do all the other 21 member states. And we have a hub near Cambridge and Hingston campus where we can then, through the hub, request services, request collaboration projects, and specifically on human data, participate in a collaboration where a number of nodes, ELIXIR nodes, together work to provide you the standardized tools and the metadata standards and the basically whatever you need for the life cycle of the data. And so ELIXIR as a whole is a hub and a node, federated nodes model, but then it's sort of distributed into 5 different platforms. One is called data, another one is called interoperability. Then there's people who are working on tools. The Finland is working heavily on the compute platform and the human data, and then we all provide training. So ELIXIR provides you excellent ways to understand how to further go into this field and try to understand what are the best ways to do research on sensitive human data and whether it's collected from single cell applications, or is it's genomic research, for example. And then we also ELIXIR provides services that are mostly at the moment outside the Finnish borders, but nevertheless, we pay membership to ELIXIR to Finland, and so we do for EMBUL as well. So these are services that are available to all Finnish researchers. And if you do want to know more about these services, you will find them from the CSC website. And we can help you to submit your data at the end of your project to some of these core services, and we can help you to understand what are the metadata requirements that are specific to each service listed in this slide. Now, there's also a Nordic collaboration called TRYPKE, and it is central. It is a very big project at the moment that covers all the Nordic countries, and where we try to understand what are the common use cases among the Nordic countries on sensitive data, how we might be able to facilitate large-scale cross-border biomedical research studies. So making it more easier to do, for example, genomic studies that have partners from Finland and Sweden and Denmark, for example. How would you get access to those samples? How we transfer the data across the borders, and how do we provide the research requirements on storage and compute for those projects? The link shown on this slide give you much more details, and you can also contact CSC to learn more about how we can support you through the TRYPKE project. Now, with that, I would like to thank you and take some questions. The first question. So what are the common mistakes or pitfalls for researchers? It's an excellent question. So I have a research background, and I have done some sensitive data research projects. So perhaps it's only right if I talk about myself rather than generalizing to everyone else. When I did research, that was 15 years ago, and the legal framework was different and the data size was smaller, but nevertheless it was sensitive. And I think the weakest point was the researcher itself, as me. And I was not necessarily aware what was sensitive data at the time and how I should take care of it. I think the new generation of researchers is much more aware of this already. But at the same time, the research projects have become far more complicated and more networked to the partners outside Finland as well. And so if you think where the weakest point at the moment is, I think it is in the most common problems may be that, have I actually thought about that my data is sensitive and therefore I should only use services that are designed for that? So for instance, the eBOTA cloud service is a good example. It's tailor-made for this use case. So if your data is sensitive, you should be using that. You have a legitimate reason to use it as well. Do I also know about the metadata standards? So once my project completes, have I thought about in advance that where am I going to put my data in the future, so that it is possible to comply to the requirements that may come with my funding, or that are part of the data policy of my own organization, and also what might be that the data is owned by a bank that requires it to be deposited in a particular way in a service that is defined as part of the contract that I signed before I started my research project. So fulfilling all those requirements needs quite a lot of thinking, and it's all if you do the data management plan, that probably is the best tool for solving these problems. So the second question is, how is the data transferred securely to ELIXIR databases, and can those databases mounted to ePOTA? That the first question is yes, we can provide you, we can help you to set up your data submission to the ELIXIR databases, the European Genome Archive, for example. The data leaves from the CSC or your host organization in a way that is encrypted and goes through the public internet and lands at the receiving end in a way that it can be then safely processed into the ELIXIR archive. So the tools exist, the metadata standard exists, and there's support from the ELIXIR sort of EGA database that provides that service, and there's support also from CSC to help you along the way. Can you then mount those databases back to ePOTA? We're working on it. We already have a technical demonstrator that allows you to either ask us to transfer data for you into CSC from these deposition databases that ELIXIR provides, or in some cases, for genomics data, we already work within the Global Alliance to provide you a standard that allows you to stream data from abroad into ePOTA and use it directly that way as well. So we're trying to roll those into production as soon as possible. If you do have those cases, please contact us and we'll have a look what we can do. And what happens to ELIXIR after Brexit? ELIXIR continues, and UK dispatches from the Europe as it has sort of wished to do for a long time. ELIXIR is an international organization, and the hub that happens to be in Cambridge in UK is not part of the UK. It's part of the EMBL organization. There is a UK node, but I don't see why the UK could not be part of the ELIXIR after Brexit as well. If you specifically thinking about the GDPR, then the EMBL EBI will be defined in a way that the data can still be deposited into some of the core data resources that are hosted by the EBI. I don't know if I answered correctly, but maybe we can contact the person again and see if that answered the question. Are there any other questions? When is no machine available in ePOTA or other ways to transfer sensitive data? The answer is that I don't know. We can look into that. Oh, remote desktop connection. Oh, so this is something that has been highly desired, that we would provide a remote desktop on top of the ePOTA service, and we're putting up the different components that are needed for that at the moment. I hope we have a technical demonstrator within the month or so, and by the end of this year, we hope to take some of the early testers for that, piloting the case, and then we have to still make a product out of it so that we have a service that we can provide in a reliable, secure, audited way. So I hope that that's somewhere next year. I think we'll stop here if there are no other questions. Thank you very much. You can always, we appreciate your feedback. So if you have anything, please contact us. And we will continue. Either you can be part of the piloting phase and different things that we just discussed during the questions, or if you have something that is specific, a specific question about how to manage sensitive data, and you would like to discuss it with us. So please contact us, and we'll find a solution for you. Thank you very much.